Her brother got the fortune. She got a rusted tool barn in Grandma's secret plan. What she found inside wasn't just about escaping her past. It was about building a future she never thought she deserved. If stories about second chances and the true meaning of home resonate with you, I hope you'll stick around and maybe even subscribe. My story isn't an easy one, but I've learned that the most important ones rarely are. The day I turned 18, the world didn't celebrate. There was no cake, no off-key singing, just a social worker named Carol handing me a standard-issue duffel bag and a manila envelope. The bag was empty. The envelope was not. I had been in the system for 10 years, ever since the accident that took my parents and split me from my brother Leo. 10 years of moving between houses that were never homes, of learning to pack light, of becoming an expert in being temporary. This was the final move. Out. "This is it, Maya," Carol said, her voice attempting a warmth it didn't quite possess. It was the same tone she used for every kid aging out, a practiced blend of encouragement and bureaucratic finality. "You've got your stipend card, the resource packet, and this came for you, from a lawyer's office." I took the envelope. It was heavy, embossed with a return address from a firm I'd never heard of. My name was typed neatly on the front, Miss Maya Jacobs. It felt like a costume. I was just Maya. For the last decade, I'd been a case file number, a ward of the state, a problem to be managed until the clock ran out. Now, I was a miss. The room I was leaving was beige. The walls were beige. The thin carpet was beige. The metal frame bed was a slightly different shade of beige. It was a room designed to be forgotten, and I was more than ready to oblige. I had 2 years of my life in that duffel bag, which amounted to a few changes of clothes, a worn paperback, and a faded photograph of me and Leo, taken a lifetime ago. He was 7, I was 8. We were grinning, missing teeth, sitting on the porch swing of our grandmother's house. Before everything. I didn't open the lawyer's letter right away. I stuffed it into the front pocket of my bag, the sharp corner of the envelope digging into the thin fabric. Fear was a cold, familiar stone in my stomach. Good news didn't come in heavy, formal envelopes. Good news didn't come from lawyers. In my experience, letters from official-looking people were about transfers, evaluations, or disciplinary actions. They were about things being taken away, not given. My foster mother, a woman named Janice who had the perpetually tired eyes of someone who'd seen too many kids like me come and go, gave me a thin-lipped smile at the door. "Good luck out there," she said. It wasn't unkind, but it was distant. I was a job, and the job was over. I walked down the concrete path, the duffel bag slung over my shoulder. The bus stop was 2 blocks away. The sky was a flat, indifferent gray, the kind that promises a cold drizzle, but never delivers. It matched my mood perfectly. I was officially free. Free to do what? Free to go where? The resource packet Carol had given me was a list of shelters, job placement agencies, and low-income housing programs with 6-month waiting lists. It was a map to a life I was already terrified of. At the bus stop, I finally pulled out the letter. My hands were trembling slightly as I tore it open. The paper was thick, creamy. It smelled like money, or what I imagined money smelled like. The letter was from a Mr. Alistair Davies, attorney at law, and it formally requested my presence at his office for the reading of the last will and testament of my grandmother, Rose Jacobs. Grandma Rose. She had passed away 3 months ago. I'd gotten a brief, sterile notification from my social worker. There was no funeral I was allowed to attend. My aunt and uncle, who had taken Leo in after the accident, had made it clear years ago that I was not a part of the family they were interested in maintaining. They got the promising, easy-to-raise boy. The state got the quiet, complicated girl who still had nightmares. Grandma had tried to stay in touch, with letters and birthday cards that were always screened by my case managers. But in the last few years, the letters had stopped. I assumed she'd finally given up or that her health had failed. To hear from her now, through a lawyer, felt like a message from a ghost. The bus arrived with a hiss of air brakes, and I got on, the letter clutched in my hand. The stipend card had enough for a few weeks of cheap motel rooms if I was careful. Enough to get me to that lawyer's office. I had nothing else. No plan, no people, no place to go. So I went to the only address I had, the address of a dead woman's wishes. I found a seat by a grimy window and watched the beige house, the gray street, the whole colorless chapter of my life shrink into the distance. I didn't know it then, but I wasn't just leaving a foster home. I was leaving the person I had been forced to become. The real journey, the one that would lead me to a rusted barn and a truth I couldn't imagine, was just beginning. The bus lurched forward, and for the first time in a long time, so did I. It was a terrifying feeling. It was the only feeling I had. The law office of Alistair Davies was on the 32nd floor of a glass and steel tower downtown. The elevator ride alone was enough to make me feel small and out of place. My worn jeans and faded hoodie felt like a costume of poverty in the hushed, carpeted silence of the lobby. Everything smelled of leather and lemon polish. A receptionist with a headset and a polite, impenetrable smile directed me to a conference room. The room was dominated by a long, polished mahogany table that reflected the gray sky outside. Mr. Davies was already there, standing by the window. He was older, with kind eyes set in a face that looked like it had seen its share of complicated grief. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than everything I owned. He didn't look down on me, though. He shook my hand, his grip firm and dry. "Miss Jacobs, Maya, thank you for coming," he said, his voice calm and even. "Please, have a seat." I sat, placing my duffel bag on the floor beside my chair. I felt like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. He sat opposite me, opening a leather-bound folder. "I was your grandmother's attorney for over 20 years, he began, his tone gentle. "She was a remarkable woman. Very deliberate. She spoke of you often." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The lump in my throat was hard and painful. She spoke of me. The words were a tiny spark in the cold emptiness of the last decade. "As you know," he continued, "Rose passed away a few months ago. I am the executor of her estate. Your aunt and uncle, who are the legal guardians of your brother, Leo, have already been informed of their part of the will. You, as of your 18th birthday, are now legally an adult and able to receive your inheritance directly." Inheritance. The word hung in the air, foreign and unbelievable. I had never inherited anything but hand-me-down clothes and the lingering sadness of my parents' absence. Mr. Davies slid a document across the table. It was a summary of the will. My eyes scanned the dense legal text, searching for my name, for Leo's. I found it. The language was cold, precise. "To my grandson, Leo Jacobs, currently under the guardianship of Sarah and Thomas Gable, I bequeath the entirety of my financial portfolio, including all stocks, bonds, and savings accounts. I also bequeath to him the family residence, located at 142 Elm Street." My breath hitched. The house on Elm Street. It was Grandma's house, the one from the photograph, the one with the porch swing. It was the heart of our family, filled with memories of summer afternoons and the smell of her baking. The financial portfolio, I knew, was substantial. My grandfather had been a successful engineer. It was a fortune, a life, a future. All for Leo. Then I found the next paragraph. "To my granddaughter, Maya Jacobs, I bequeath the property located at 25 Quarry Road, on the outskirts of town, including the structure upon it and all of its contents." Quarry Road? I searched my memory. It was a dirt road, barely a road at all, that led out past the old rock quarry. It was where people went to dump old tires and broken furniture. The structure? I vaguely remembered a dilapidated barn out there, a corrugated metal eyesore that had been falling down for as long as I could remember. That was it. That was my inheritance. A piece of worthless land and a collapsing building. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. It wasn't just disappointment. It was a deep, guttural confirmation of a decade-long fear. I was the leftover, the one who wasn't worth the trouble. My own grandmother, the last person I thought loved me unconditionally, had looked at her 2 grandchildren and decided he was worth a house and a future, and I was worth a pile of rust. I know this may be difficult to process, Mr. Davies said softly, watching my face. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the paper, the black and white words that had just formally, legally defined my worth. Less than nothing. Your grandmother was very specific in her instructions, he went on, pushing a cardboard box across the table. It was a simple banker's box sealed with tape. She left this for you as well. It contains the keys to the property and some personal effects. I looked at the box. It felt like a consolation prize, a box of junk to go with my junk property. The anger was a hot wave, washing away the cold shock. Anger at my grandmother, at my aunt and uncle, at the whole world that had decided so long ago who I was supposed to be. Mr. Davies cleared his throat. There is one other matter. The property taxes on the Quarry Road lot are minimal, and they have been paid up for the next 5 years. The property is owned free and clear. There are no liens, no debts against it whatsoever. For what it's worth, it was worth nothing. A debt-free pile of garbage is still a pile of garbage. I finally found my voice, but it came out as a croak. Why? He gave me a look of genuine sympathy. I cannot speak to your grandmother's motivations, Maya. I can only execute her wishes as written. She was a woman who believed people should make their own way. Perhaps she believed this was a tool for you to do that. A tool barn. He had no idea how literal he was being. I stood up, my chair scraping against the polished floor. I grabbed the box. It was surprisingly heavy. I slung my duffel bag over my other shoulder. Thank you for your time, Mr. Davies, I said, the words stiff and formal. I was mimicking the adults who had processed me my whole life. Maya, he said, stopping me at the door. There's an envelope inside the box. On top. She made me promise I would tell you to read it before you do anything else. Before you make any decisions. I didn't answer. I just walked out of the conference room, through the silent lobby, and into the elevator that took me back down to a world where I was once again just a girl with a duffel bag. But now I also had a box containing a set of keys to a ruin, and a final, cryptic message from the woman who had just broken my heart from beyond the grave. The weight of it all was crushing. I didn't know it yet, but the weight was the point. It was the first thing my grandmother had given me that was truly mine. The bus ticket to Northwood, my old hometown, cost me $43. It was a significant chunk of my stipend, a gamble on a ghost's last wish. I sat in the grimy bus station for 2 hours, the cardboard box on my lap, my duffel bag at my feet. I refused to open the box. Not yet. I felt a strange, stubborn resistance to whatever was inside. It was as if not looking at the contents could somehow hold the finality of it all at bay. The keys would make it real. The letter would make it hurt. The bus was old, and the air inside was thick with the smell of diesel and stale coffee. I found a seat by the window and watched the city skyline recede, replaced by an endless sprawl of suburbs, then strip malls, and finally, the open, rolling fields of the countryside. The journey was 4 hours long. 4 hours of watching the world blur past, my own reflection a faint, ghostly presence in the glass. Memories I hadn't allowed myself to touch for years began to surface. The scratchy wool of my dad's favorite sweater, the sound of my mom's laughter in the kitchen, The feeling of Leo's small hand in mine as we ran through the sprinklers in Grandma Rose's backyard. They were sharp, painful fragments of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. After the accident, after the hospital, the social workers came. They told me my parents were gone. They told me my aunt and uncle were taking Leo. They told me a suitable placement would be found for me. Suitable. Such a cold, clinical word. I remembered clinging to Leo's hand at the social services office, a sterile room that smelled of disinfectant. He was crying. I wasn't. I had gone somewhere deep inside myself, a place where tears couldn't reach. My Aunt Sarah, my mother's sister, had knelt down in front of us. She had looked at Leo, her face full of pity and a kind of acquisitive love. Then she had looked at me, and her expression tightened. I was the older one, the one who had been in the car, the quiet, watchful one, the difficult one. "We can only manage one right now," she'd said to the social worker, not to me. "It's for the best." And just like that, the last piece of my world was severed. They took him, and I was left behind. The system swallowed me whole. Now, 10 years later, my grandmother's will felt like the final echo of that moment. Leo was chosen. I was not. The landscape outside the window was becoming more familiar. The dense pine forests, the winding 2-lane roads, the occasional rusted-out pickup truck in a field. Northwood wasn't a place people moved to. It was a place people were from. A place you left if you could. As the bus wheezed its way into the small downtown terminal, a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. The town square looked exactly the same. A small gazebo, a granite war memorial, a handful of storefronts that had been there for 50 years. The bakery, the hardware store, the diner. It was like stepping into a photograph. I got off the bus, the weight of the box and the bag feeling heavier in the humid country air. I was a stranger here now, a ghost haunting the edges of my own past. I had no idea where Quarry Road was, exactly, only that it was on the outskirts. I went into the diner, the bell over the door chiming a welcome I didn't feel. An older woman with a kind, tired face was wiping down the counter. "Help you, honey?" "I'm looking for Quarry Road," I said, my voice quiet. She paused, giving me a long look. It wasn't hostile, just curious. Strangers were a novelty here. "Not much out on Quarry Road, except for the old quarry and that mess of a barn. You're not thinking of going out there, are you? It's not safe." "The barn is... it's mine," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Her eyebrows shot up. "You're Rose Jacobs' girl? The granddaughter?" I was stunned. "You knew her?" "Knew her? Honey, everyone knew Rose. She used to come in here for coffee every morning, stubborn as a mule and twice as smart. We were all so sorry to hear she passed." She looked at me again, her eyes softening. "You've got her eyes." The simple observation was like a crack in the icy wall around my heart. Someone here remembered her. Someone here saw a piece of her in me. "Quarry Road is about a 2-mile walk that way," she said, pointing east. "But it's getting dark. You can't walk out there. Let me call my husband, Earl. He'll give you a lift." I tried to refuse, unused to such casual kindness, but she would have none of it. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of a rattling old Ford pickup, driven by a man with hands as gnarled as oak roots. Earl didn't talk much, which was a relief. He just drove, the tires crunching on the gravel as we turned off the paved road and onto a dirt track I now recognized as Quarry Road. We pulled up to a sagging barbed wire fence, and there it was, the barn. It was worse than I remembered. The corrugated metal walls were a patchwork of rust and faded red paint, streaked with years of grime. The roof sagged dangerously in the middle. The whole structure seemed to be leaning into the wind, as if tired of standing. Weeds and thorny bushes grew in a thick, impenetrable tangle around its base. It wasn't an inheritance. It was a carcass. "This is it," Earl said, his voice flat. He looked from the barn to me, a question in his eyes. "This is it," I confirmed, my voice hollow. He helped me get my things out of the truck bed. "You got a key for that place?" I nodded, my hand instinctively going to the box. "All right then," he said, clearly not wanting to interfere, but also not wanting to leave me stranded. "The diner's open till 9. If you need anything, you call. The number's on the napkin Peggy gave you." He pressed a crumpled napkin into my hand. I watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing into the twilight, leaving me alone with the silence, the encroaching dark, and the monument to my own worthlessness. For a long moment, I just stood there, listening to the crickets and the wind whistling through the holes in the rusted metal. Then, taking a deep breath, I set the box down, unlatched the gate, and walked onto the property that was, impossibly, mine. The path to the barn was choked with weeds that snagged at my jeans. The air grew colder as the last of the sun's light vanished behind the trees. It smelled of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the metallic tang of rust. I reached the massive sliding door. A heavy chain and a formidable-looking padlock held it shut. This was it, the moment of truth. I put my duffel bag down and finally opened the cardboard box. On top, just as Mr. Davies had said, was a thick, cream-colored envelope with my name, Maya, written in a familiar, elegant script. Grandma Rosa's handwriting. Beneath it, nestled in a bed of tissue paper, was a heavy, old-fashioned iron key ring. There were about a dozen keys on it, all shapes and sizes, coated in a fine layer of dust. One was a large, ornate brass key, clearly meant for the padlock. My fingers hesitated over the envelope. "Read it before you do anything else." The lawyer's words echoed in my mind. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to see. I needed to stand in the middle of this disaster and feel the full weight of her final judgment. I needed to know the worst before I could allow for the possibility of anything else. I picked up the keyring. The brass key fit the padlock perfectly. It was stiff from disuse, and I had to put my whole body into it, grunting with the effort. With a final, groaning click, the lock sprang open. The chain fell to the ground with a heavy clank. The door was even heavier. I found a handle and pulled. It wouldn't budge. I pulled again, my sneakers slipping on the damp ground. It moved a fraction of an inch with a sound like tearing metal. I set my shoulder against it and pushed. Slowly, painfully, a dark gap opened up. I squeezed through the opening into the cavernous darkness inside. The air was thick and still, heavy with the smell of old oil, sawdust, and something else. Something that smelled like time itself. A sliver of moonlight from the doorway cut through the gloom, illuminating a landscape of ghostly shapes. Workbenches covered in tarps, skeletons of forgotten machinery, stacks of lumber leaning against a wall, draped in cobwebs as thick as cotton. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut a bright dancing circle through the dark. The barn was huge, much bigger than it looked from the outside. The ceiling soared 2 stories high, crisscrossed with heavy wooden beams. Tools of every imaginable kind hung from the walls. Wrenches, saws, drills, all coated in a fine red dust. It wasn't just a barn. It was a workshop, a serious one. I walked deeper inside, my footsteps echoing in the immense silence. This was my grandmother's? I couldn't picture her here. My memories of her were of baking, of gardening, of soft hands and a gentle smile. This place was hard, industrial, masculine. It didn't make sense. In the far back corner, my light landed on a small, enclosed room, a door set into a plywood wall. An office. I went to it, my heart starting to beat a little faster. The door was locked with a simple knob and keyhole. I went back for the key ring, my light bobbing crazily. I tried a few of the smaller keys. The third one clicked. The office was tiny, no bigger than a closet. It contained a single, battered wooden desk and a chair. Everything was coated in the same layer of dust, except for one spot. In the very center of the desk, there was a clean rectangle. Something had been sitting there until very recently. Next to that clean spot was a small, shoebox-sized wooden box, intricately carved, with my name, Maya, burned into the lid. And next to that, an old, portable cassette recorder. The kind with the big, clunky buttons. My breath caught. This was a setup. The clean space, the box, the recorder. It was all waiting for me. My hands were shaking now, a mixture of fear and a strange, unfamiliar flicker of hope. I lifted the lid of the wooden box. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, were two things. A thick stack of letters, tied with a simple ribbon, all in Grandma Rose's hand, and a single cassette tape, labeled with one word: play. I sank into the dusty chair, my legs suddenly weak. The silence of the barn pressed in on me. I looked from the letters to the tape recorder. This was the real inheritance. Not the building, not the land. This was the reason she had sent me here. With a trembling finger, I opened the cassette player, inserted the tape, and pushed the play button. There was a click, a soft whir, and then her voice. It was older than I remembered, a little scratchy, but it was unmistakably her. It was the voice of Grandma Rose, filling the dusty, forgotten room. Maya, her voice crackled, warm and impossibly close. My dear Maya, if you are hearing this, it means you made it. It means you are sitting in the office of my old barn, and you are 18, and you are alone. And for all of that, I am so sorry. Tears pricked my eyes. I swiped at them angrily. I imagine, she continued, her voice heavy with a sigh I could feel in my bones, that you are also very angry with me. I imagine you have seen my will. You have seen that I left your brother, Leo, the house and the money, and I left you this, a pile of rust and memories. I need you to listen to me now, child. I need you to listen very carefully. I did not abandon you. I protected you. A dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips. Protected me? By giving me nothing? The fortune I left Leo, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, is a lie. It's an illusion, a trap. Your parents, God rest their souls, were wonderful people, but they were not good with money. The business they started before they died. It failed, Maya. It failed spectacularly. They took out loans, second mortgages. They borrowed from dangerous people. When they died, they left behind a mountain of hidden debt. A mountain so large it would have crushed anyone who tried to climb it. My mind was reeling. Debt? My parents had always seemed successful. We had a nice house, 2 cars. It didn't make sense. Your aunt and uncle, she went on, and now there was a hard edge to her voice, a steel I had never heard before. Sarah and Thomas. They knew, or at least they suspected. But they saw the house, they saw the portfolio your grandfather left me, and their greed blinded them. They fought to take Leo because they thought he was the ticket to that fortune. They made it clear you were not part of that equation. So, I made a choice. A terrible, awful choice. I let them have what they wanted. I let them think they were inheriting a windfall. The pieces started to click into place, sharp and painful. The way my aunt had looked at me. We can only manage one. The will is a performance, Maya. A show for them. The house on Elm Street is mortgaged to the hilt. The investment accounts have been systematically drained over the last 8 years to pay off the most pressing creditors, to keep the wolves from the door. What's left for Leo and your guardians is a house they can't afford to keep and a portfolio that's a ghost of its former self. By the time the lawyers and the creditors are done, there will be nothing left. In fact, they will likely be in debt themselves. I couldn't tell you this. I couldn't put it in the will. They would have contested it, dragged you into a legal battle that would have destroyed you. This was the only way. To give them a poisoned chalice and give you the antidote. The room was spinning. I gripped the edge of the desk. Not abandonment. Protection. Not a judgment. A strategy. This barn. Her voice softened again, full of warmth. This land. This is the only thing our family owns that is truly free. Your grandfather and I bought it with cash 50 years ago. There has never been a loan against it. No one knows its true value. It's off the books. It's safe. It's yours, Maya. Truly, completely yours. It may not look like much, but it is a foundation. A place to start, free and clear of all the mistakes of the past. I looked through the office door, out into the vast, dark space of the barn. It didn't look like a carcass anymore. It looked like a fortress. A shelter. I'm sorry for the deception, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. It has broken my heart every day for 10 years to know you were out there, thinking I had forgotten you. I never forgot you. I just had to wait. I had to wait until you were old enough and strong enough to handle the truth. The letters in the box will explain the rest. Everything you need is here, Maya. Everything you need to build a life. A real one. I love you. Never, ever doubt that. The tape clicked off. The silence that rushed back in was different now. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of shock and grief and a fragile, terrifying hope. I looked at the stack of letters, my hands trembling. I untied the ribbon. The first letter was on top, its edges soft with age. I began to read. My grandmother hadn't just left me a barn. She had left me a roadmap. She had left me a choice. And for the first time in my life, the choice was entirely my own. For a long time, I just sat there in the dark, the tape recorder silent, my grandmother's words echoing in the vast emptiness of my mind. It was too much to take in. A decade of my life, a decade of feeling like discarded trash, had been built on a lie. But the lie wasn't that I was worthless. The lie was the fortune itself. The truth was that my grandmother had seen the iceberg coming and had steered me, the smaller, more vulnerable vessel, into a hidden safe harbor, while leaving the bigger, greedier ship to its fate. The weight of her sacrifice was crushing. To protect me, she had to let me believe she didn't love me. She had to endure my aunt and uncle's smug victory. She had to die with this secret, trusting that I would be strong enough to uncover it. Tears finally came. Not the hot tears of anger I'd felt in the lawyer's office, but deep, ragged sobs of grief and gratitude. I cried for the grandmother I had lost twice, once to silence, and now again to death. I cried for the lonely, scared little girl I had been, who had weathered so much believing she was alone. I cried for my brother Leo, a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing, trapped with people who saw him as a meal ticket. And I cried with a strange, fierce relief. I wasn't abandoned. I was saved. When the tears finally subsided, a cold clarity settled over me. I was sitting in the dark, in a falling-down barn, with almost no money to my name. My situation was, on paper, terrible. But for the first time since I was 8 years old, I didn't feel helpless. I felt anchored. This place, this wreck of a building, was my anchor. I picked up the stack of letters. The first one, the one on top, was shorter than the others. Her handwriting was a beautiful, looping cursive, the ink slightly faded. My dearest Maya, if you are reading this after hearing my voice, then you know the great deception. I hope, with all my heart, that you can find it in yourself to forgive an old woman's desperate plan. I saw the greed in Sarah's eyes that day. She wanted the life she thought your mother had, and she was willing to discard you to get it. I knew then that I could not fight her openly. The system was on her side. A stable, two-parent household, a blood relative. You would have been lost in the courts for years. Instead, I chose to play a longer game, a game of patience. I knew your strength, Maya. I saw it in you even as a little girl. You were always the watcher, the quiet one who saw everything. You were the one who fixed the broken bird's wing, who figured out how my grandfather's old radio worked. You have a builder's soul. Leo has a dreamer's heart. I had to give each of you the gift you would need most. He needed the illusion of security to survive your aunt and uncle. You needed the truth of a solid foundation to survive the world. This barn is that foundation. It is ugly and old and forgotten, and that is why it is safe. No one will ever try to take it from you. Don't be afraid of the work ahead. Your grandfather and I built our lives with our own 2 hands. There is a power in that, a power no one can ever take from you. You are more capable than you know. Trust yourself, and trust me. All the tools you need are here. With all my love, forever. Grandma Rose. A builder's soul. The phrase resonated deep within me. All my life in foster care, I had been praised for being quiet, for not causing trouble. No one had ever called me capable. No one had ever told me I had a powerful soul. My grief began to morph into a slow-burning resolve. My grandmother didn't just leave me a building. She left me a mission. A blueprint for a new life. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where one piece of information changes not just your future, but the entire story of your past, where everything you thought was true gets turned upside down, and you're left standing in the rubble, realizing it's not rubble at all, but a foundation. If you have, I want you to know you're not alone. So many of us are handed stories about ourselves that aren't true. Stories of being too difficult, too quiet, not enough. The most important work we can ever do is learning to find the truth for ourselves. If you're on that journey, or you've been on it, I'd be honored if you shared a piece of it in the comments. This is a community for people who know what it's like to have to rebuild. I sat there for another hour, just breathing in the dusty air of the office. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was no longer the screaming panic of before. It was the healthy fear that comes before you attempt something huge and terrifying and important. Finally, I stood up. I needed to see this place not as a ruin, but as a resource. With a new sense of purpose, I walked out of the office, my phone's flashlight beam cutting a more confident path through the darkness. All the tools you need are here. Her words guided me. I began to explore, really explore, for the first time. The workbenches weren't just covered in junk. Under the tarps were high-quality tools, a table saw, a drill press, a planer. They were old, but they were solid, cast iron machines from an era when things were built to last. The walls weren't just holding up the roof. They were a library of hand tools, each with its own designated spot, outlined in faded paint. This was the workshop of a master craftsperson, my grandfather. I ran my hand over the cool metal of a lathe. I could almost feel the history in it, the ghosts of projects created in this very spot. My grandmother had kept it all, preserved it, waiting for me. This wasn't just a barn. It was an inheritance of skill, of potential. It was a place where things could be made, where broken things could be fixed. A place where I could fix myself. The weight of the choice ahead settled on me. I could sell the property. A developer might pay a small sum for the land, even with the cleanup cost. I could take that money and disappear, start a new life somewhere else, anonymous and free. Or I could stay. I could accept the challenge my grandmother had laid out for me. I could take this pile of rust and memories and build a home. It was the harder path, the scarier path. It was the path that required me to become the person my grandmother believed I already was. I walked to the massive front door and slid it open another few feet, letting the cool night air rush in. The stars were brilliant out here, away from the city lights. I looked out at the dark, overgrown plot of land and the leaning, rusted structure behind me. It was ugly. It was daunting. It was perfect. The choice was clear. I wasn't going to run. I was going to stay. I was going to fight. I was going to build. This wasn't just my inheritance. It was my home. The decision settled in my bones, solid and sure. The work would be hard, but it would be mine, and it would start tomorrow. The next letter in the stack was less emotional, more practical. It was a guide. My grandmother, ever the deliberate planner, had left me a step-by-step manual for survival. Maya. First things first, you will need power and you will need money. The world, unfortunately, runs on both. Taped to the back of this letter, you will find a key. It opens the old tackle box under the main workbench, the green metal one. Your grandfather was a fisherman, but he kept more than lures in that box. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scrambled back to the main workshop area, my light beam dancing wildly. There it was, under the largest workbench, a dusty, olive-green metal box, just as she'd described. I found the letter again, and sure enough, a small, flat key was taped to the back. It fit the lock. I turned it, and the lid popped open with a faint squeak. Inside, nestled amongst old fishing lures and reels, were thick, paper-banded bundles of cash. 50s and 100s. I lifted them out, my hands shaking. I counted. $10,000. It felt like $1 million. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a lifeline. It was enough to get the power turned on, to buy food, to get supplies. It was seed money, a runway. I sat on the dusty floor, the cash in my lap, and laughed. A real, genuine laugh that echoed in the huge, silent barn. Of course she had hidden it here. Practical, clever Grandma Rose. She had thought of everything. The letter continued. This is not a treasure, Maya. It is a tool. Use it wisely. It should be enough to get you started and to live on for a while as you work. Do not tell anyone about it. The first rule of having a foundation is not to show anyone the cracks they could exploit. Second, the barn itself. It looks worse than it is. Your grandfather built this structure with his own hands. The foundation is solid concrete, 6 inches thick. The steel beams that frame it were salvaged from an old mill. They will stand for another 100 years. The rust is ugly, but it is mostly superficial. The roof is the main problem. It leaks. In the office, in the bottom drawer of the desk, you will find a set of blueprints. I rushed back to the office. I pulled open the bottom drawer. It was stuck fast. I had to yank it hard, the wood groaning in protest. Inside, rolled up and tied with a string, was a set of old, faded blueprints. I unrolled them on the desk. They weren't blueprints for the barn. They were blueprints for a small, efficient, one-bedroom house. A house designed to be built inside the existing shell of the barn, using the barn's frame as an outer shield against the weather. It was brilliant. It meant I didn't have to tear the whole thing down. I could build my home within the fortress she had left me. My eyes scanned the detailed drawings. A small kitchen, a living area with a wood-burning stove, a bathroom, a bedroom loft. It was a complete, self-sufficient home. A cocoon. My grandmother hadn't just given me a space, she had given me the plan. But there was one more letter in the box, in a separate, sealed envelope marked Leo. My hands trembled as I opened it. This one was different. It wasn't a letter. It was a collection of documents. Bank statements, loan agreements with predatory interest rates, copies of letters from creditors addressed to my parents. It was a paper trail of financial ruin. And at the bottom was a more recent financial summary. One that showed my aunt and uncle had been using what little was left of Grandma's estate, not to pay down the old debts, but for their own personal expenses. A new car, a vacation. It wasn't just mismanagement, it was fraud. A final note from my grandmother was clipped to the top. Maya, this is the hardest gift I will ever give you. This is proof. Proof of your parents' mistakes, and proof of your aunt and uncle's greed. What you do with it is your choice. You can take it to the authorities. They would likely face legal consequences, and Leo would be put back into the system. Or you can use it as leverage, a way to get Leo out from under their control, to show him the truth, and to offer him a real home. With you. The choice is between justice and mercy, Maya. I do not know which is right. That is for you to decide. You are the head of this family now. Whatever you choose, Know that your grandfather and I will be proud of you. Now get to work." I sank back into the chair, the documents spread before me. The weight of this final choice was immense. Ruin my aunt and uncle and traumatize my brother? Or attempt a delicate, dangerous negotiation to save him? My grandmother had handed me a sword. She was asking me if I wanted to be a warrior or a diplomat. For 10 years, I had been powerless. Now, I held all the power. And it was terrifying. I looked around the dusty office, at the blueprints for a home that didn't exist yet, at the cash that was both a gift and a burden. I thought of Leo, living in a house of lies, believing I was the one who had been cast aside. My choice was made. I wouldn't use this information for revenge. I would use it for rescue. I would build this home. And when it was ready, I would bring my brother here. I would give him the one thing the money could never buy: a safe harbor. A family. The truth. The decision settled not like a weight, but like a skeleton key, unlocking a part of myself I didn't know existed. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear, and unshakable purpose. I stood up, rolled up the blueprints, and put the cash and the incriminating documents back in their hiding places. My first night as a property owner was spent not in a warm bed, but curled up in the dusty office chair, wrapped in an old tarp for warmth. I didn't sleep much. My mind was racing, planning. First light, I would walk into town. I would go to the hardware store. I would call the power company. I would call Mr. Davies. The work had already begun. The next morning, I woke up stiff and cold, but with a fire in my belly. The sun streamed through the grimy, cracked windows of the barn, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It looked like a cathedral of forgotten things. My cathedral. I made the 2-mile walk back into town. The air was crisp, and the world felt new. Northwood didn't look like a dead-end town anymore. It looked like a starting point. My first stop was the diner. Peggy, the owner, was there, and she gave me a warm smile when I walked in. "You survived the night," she said, pouring me a cup of coffee without asking. "I was worried about you." "It's solid," I said, surprising myself with the confidence in my voice. "The barn, it's solid." "Rose always said so," she nodded. "Said your granddad built it to survive a war." I ordered a big breakfast, the first real meal I'd had in days, and used the diner's phone to call the power company. The woman on the other end was skeptical when I gave her the address, but the account was still in my grandmother's name. All I had to do was switch it to mine and pay a deposit. I used the stipend card Carol had given me, saving the cash for materials. They said they could have someone out by the end of the day. My next call was to Mr. Davies. "Maya," he said, his voice full of surprise. "I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. Are you all right?" "I'm better than all right, Mr. Davies," I said, my voice steady. "I'm at the property. I've read my grandmother's letters. I know everything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. "I see," he finally said, his professional reserve cracking just a little. She was a remarkable woman. I had my suspicions about the estate's true condition, but she held her cards very close to her chest. "She did," I agreed. "Mr. Davies, I'm not selling, I'm staying. I'm going to build a life here, but I need your help. Not for me, for my brother." I explained, briefly, what the documents revealed about my aunt and uncle. I told him my plan, not to prosecute, but to liberate Leo. He was silent for another long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was filled with a new respect. "That is a very wise and compassionate path to choose, Maya. Your grandmother would be proud. Yes, I will help you. We will need to proceed carefully. Let me begin by doing some discreet digging into the estate's current financials from my end. When the time is right, we will approach them. You just focus on what you need to do there. Keep me informed." I hung up the phone feeling 100 pounds lighter. I had an ally. A powerful one. My last stop was the hardware store. It was a magical place, smelling of sawdust and metal and possibility. A man who looked as old as the hills, with a name tag that read Gus, watched me from behind the counter as I wandered the aisles, looking at lumber, insulation, and roofing materials. "You're Rose's girl," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I am," I said. "Figured you'd be in," he grunted. She paid up her account before she passed. Said her granddaughter might be needing some supplies. "Got a credit here for you, $500. I stared at him, speechless. Another breadcrumb. Another piece of her intricate, posthumous plan. She had paved the way for me at every single turn. I spent the credit on the basics: heavy-duty cleaning supplies, work gloves, a new set of drill bits, and a large, waterproof tarp to patch the worst of the leaks in the roof. Gus helped me load everything into a rusty wheelbarrow he threw in for free. "You'll need it," was all he said. The walk back to the barn was slow, the wheelbarrow heavy, but I felt invincible. When I got there, a truck from the power company was just leaving. I walked into the barn and flipped a switch by the door. A string of bare bulbs flickered on, casting a warm, yellow glow over the entire space. It wasn't a ruin anymore. It was a workshop. It was mine. The next few weeks were a blur of the hardest work I had ever done. I started by cleaning. I shoveled out years of accumulated dirt and debris. I swept away cobwebs that were as thick as my arm. I scrubbed the concrete floor until the gray of the cement showed through the grime. Every muscle in my body ached. I got blisters on my hands. I was exhausted every night, and I had never felt better in my life. The work was methodical, therapeutic. With every shovelful of dirt I removed, I felt like I was clearing out a part of my own past. With every inch of floor I scrubbed, I was polishing my own future. I was not a ward of the state. I was not a case file. I was a woman building her own home. I patched the roof with the tarp, a temporary but effective fix. I started clearing the overgrown land around the barn, cutting back the thorny bushes and pulling up weeds that were as tall as I was. I found the remnants of my grandmother's old garden, a few stubborn rose bushes still clinging to life. I cleared the weeds around them carefully, giving them room to breathe. One evening, after a long day of work, I decided it was time. I took out my phone and dialed the number for my aunt and uncle's house. I hadn't spoken to them in 10 years. My Aunt Sarah answered. "Hello?" Her voice was clipped, impatient. "It's Maya," I said. There was a stunned silence. "Maya? Why are you calling?" "I'd like to speak to Leo, please." "He's busy," she said quickly. Too quickly. "He's studying." "Please put him on the phone, Sarah," I said, my voice calm but firm. It was the voice I had heard in my grandmother's recording, the voice of someone who would not be dismissed. I heard her say something, her hand muffled over the receiver. Then, a new voice. Younger, tentative. "Hello? Leo?" My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. "Maya?" he whispered. "Is that really you?" "It's me," I said, my voice thick. I'm back in Northwood." "What? Why?" "It's a long story, but I'm here, and I just wanted to say, I'm not going anywhere. If you ever need me, Leo, for anything, I'm here." There was a choked sound on his end. Okay, Maya. I have to go." The line went dead. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I had planted a seed. Now I just had to wait for it to grow. I went back to work, the sound of my brother's voice giving me new strength. I wasn't just building for myself anymore. I was building for him too. Months bled into one another, marked by the changing seasons and the slow transformation of the barn. The initial cleanup gave way to the framing of the house inside. I followed my grandmother's blueprints meticulously, measuring twice, cutting once, just as I imagined my grandfather would have. I learned how to use the table saw, how to frame a wall, how to run electrical wiring. I watched countless hours of instructional videos online. I made mistakes. I cut boards too short. I hit my thumb with the hammer more times than I could count. But with each mistake, I learned. Gus from the hardware store became an unlikely mentor. I'd go in with a question about plumbing or insulation, and he'd grunt and draw me a diagram on a piece of scrap paper. He never praised me, but one day, as I was loading drywall into a rented truck, he said, "You're a hard worker. Your grandpa would have liked that." Coming from Gus, it was the highest compliment. The $10,000 dwindled, spent on lumber, insulation, pipes, and wire. I was frugal, salvaging whatever I could from the barn itself, but building a house, even a small one, was expensive. I took a part-time job washing dishes at Peggy's Diner to supplement my income. I'd work on the house all day, then go to the diner and wash dishes until late at night, my body screaming with exhaustion. But it was a good kind of tired, the tired that comes from building something real. My relationship with Leo was a slow, delicate dance. We started texting, then talking on the phone once a week. The calls were awkward at first, full of 10 years of unspoken history. I never mentioned the money or the will. I just asked him about school, about his friends. I told him about my project, about the barn. I sent him pictures of my progress. "You're really building a house?" he asked one day, a sense of wonder in his voice. "I am," I said. "That's amazing, Maya." I could hear the strain in his life, just beneath the surface of his words. He talked about the pressure to get into a good college, the constant arguments between my aunt and uncle about money. He was living in a gilded cage, and he was starting to see the bars. Meanwhile, Mr. Davies and I were working in the background. His investigation had confirmed everything my grandmother's documents suggested. The estate was a house of cards, and my aunt and uncle were in over their heads. We decided to wait for the right moment to act. That moment came 6 months after my first phone call to Leo. He called me, his voice frantic. "Maya, they're selling Grandma's house. The bank is foreclosing. They lied about everything. There's no money, there's nothing." "I know, Leo," I said softly. "It's okay. You're going to be okay." "Where am I going to go?" he asked, his voice breaking. He was 17, a year away from being on his own, and his world was collapsing. "You're going to come here," I said, my voice full of a certainty that I had earned with every nail I had hammered. "You're going to come home." The next day, Mr. Davies formally contacted my aunt and uncle. He laid out the evidence of their fraud, the proof of the estate's insolvency. He didn't threaten prosecution, he made them an offer. They would sign over legal guardianship of Leo to me, his adult sister. In exchange, the evidence of their fraud would not be turned over to the authorities. They would be left to deal with the fallout of the debts on their own, but they would stay out of jail. They agreed immediately. A week later, I drove Gus's borrowed pickup truck to the bus station. Leo stepped off the bus carrying a single suitcase, looking lost and scared. He was taller than me now, but he had the same eyes I remembered from when he was 7. He looked at me, then at the old truck, then back at me. "Is it really true?" he asked. "What you're doing?" "It's true," I said. I drove him out to Quarry Road. As we pulled up to the barn, his eyes went wide. The exterior was still a patchwork of rust, but the land around it was clear. There were neat stacks of lumber, a small, thriving garden, and the old rose bushes were in full bloom. I led him inside. The interior was transformed. The frame of my small house stood in the center of the vast space, the walls up, the loft built. Wires snaked through the studs, waiting for drywall. It wasn't finished, but it was undeniably a home in the making. "Wow," he breathed, looking up at the high ceiling of the barn, then at the cozy structure taking shape within it. Grandma did this? She gave me the plan, I said, running my hand along a smooth wooden beam. We have to do the work. That night, I gave him the last of the letters from Grandma Rose, the one addressed to him. In it, she explained everything, just as she had for me. She told him about the debt, about my aunt and uncle, about why she had to separate us to save us. She told him that true wealth wasn't money, but resilience, and that his sister had that in spades. He read it, and he cried. And for the first time in a decade, I was there to comfort him. We weren't the chosen one and the leftover anymore. We were just a brother and a sister, two survivors, finally back together. We had lost everything. But in this strange, beautiful, rusted-out barn, we had found the one thing that mattered. We had found home. The work wasn't over. It was just beginning. But now, we would do it together. The story doesn't end there, of course. A house isn't built in a day, and a family isn't healed in a single conversation. The months that followed were a new kind of challenge. Leo and I had to learn how to live together again, to navigate the ghosts of the 10 years we'd spent apart. He was grieving the life he thought he had, and I was learning to let someone into the solitary world I had so carefully constructed. We worked on the house together. At first, he was clumsy and hesitant, unused to physical labor. But he was a quick learner. He had our grandfather's mind for mechanics and our grandmother's patience. He helped me hang the drywall, mud the seams, and run the plumbing. We argued about the color of the paint and the placement of light fixtures. We blasted music and got covered in sawdust. And with every board we cut and every screw we drove, we were rebuilding more than just a house. We were rebuilding our family. One day, he found my grandmother's old tackle box while he was cleaning. He opened it and saw the fishing lures. "Did Grandpa really fish?" he asked. "Grandma said he did," I replied. I didn't mention the cash that had once been hidden there. That was part of my story, my foundation. He would have his own. The barn became our world. We finished the small house inside it, and it was beautiful. The light streamed in through the new windows I'd installed in the barn's walls, illuminating our cozy living space. We put a wood-burning stove in the corner, and the smell of burning pine filled our home on cold nights. I claimed the loft bedroom, and we built a second small bedroom for Leo on the ground floor. I never showed my aunt and uncle the evidence of their fraud. They lost the house on Elm Street and quietly moved away, buried under the weight of the debts they had so eagerly courted. There was no victory in it for me, only a quiet sadness for the choices they had made. Justice, I realized, wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was just about letting the consequences play out. My life, which had been so small and quiet for so long, began to expand. Peggy offered me a job as a waitress, and I found I liked talking to people. Gus started teaching me woodworking, showing me how to use the lathe and the planer my grandfather had left behind. I started making small things, bowls, picture frames, and selling them at the local farmer's market. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. I was a builder, just as my grandmother had said. Leo finished high school at the local school. He decided not to go to a fancy, expensive college. Instead, he enrolled in a community college program for automotive engineering. He spent his afternoons in the barn, tinkering with an old motorcycle engine he'd bought for scrap. He was brilliant at it. He had found his own path. One cool autumn evening, 2 years after I first set foot in the barn, Leo and I were sitting on the new porch we had built onto the side of the structure. We were watching the sun set, sipping coffee. The land was clear, the garden was put to bed for the winter, and the barn stood tall and solid, a silent guardian around our small, warm home. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked quietly. "The life you thought you had?" He was silent for a long moment, watching the orange and purple hues of the sky. "I miss the idea of it," he said finally. "I miss being a kid who didn't have to worry about things. But it wasn't real. None of it. This," he said, gesturing to the barn, the land, the quiet world we had built. This is real. He was right. My grandmother hadn't just given me a property. She had given me something real. In a world of illusions and false promises, she had given me a place that was solid, true, and completely my own. She taught me that inheritance isn't about what you are given, but about what you build with it. Home isn't a place you find, it's a place you make. And family isn't just about the people you're born to, but the people you fight for, the people you show up for, the people you build with, side by side. My story is the story of a rusted-out barn and a grandmother's secret plan. But I hope it's also a story about the power we all have to take the broken pieces we are given and build something strong, something beautiful, something real. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. This channel is a place for stories like this, for people who have been through the fire and are learning to rebuild on the other side. If that's you, I hope you'll subscribe and become a part of this community. Please, share your own stories in the comments below. Tell me about the unexpected gifts in your life, the foundations you've had to build. I read every single one. Because every story of resilience, every story of turning a ruin into a home, deserves to be heard. You are not alone. We are all builders here.
Oh gosh, I didn't mean to put no. Hey Maze. Good to see you. Also, thanks for the goats, Ash. Appreciate it. Yeah, for sure, no doubt. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. It's like a little too on the nose not to be Ninetales. You know what I mean, Runes? Okay, we'll take... I do need some of these. Actually, we can just do it right here, right? Okay. We'll move some of this. Okay. I think there's a step stool in here that we can go grab. Mine's always been Rapidash. Rapidash is a good one, Maze. Logopia is huge, right? It's gigantic, Runes. Gonna lurk and clean my apartment a little? Okay, sounds good, Emma. It's actually kind of crazy how big it is, Runes. Okay, we'll take one of these. Hey, maybe we can make a little study spot over here too. Bookcase, seat, table, pencil holder. Enter. Will this count? Maybe. That would be cute, then all three of them in the same room. No, I think it's like slightly too far away.